Lee talked about a little bit about reducing landowner liability, and I framed this more in terms of managing your liability on property. And started out, I always like to, next slide, to talk about, this is probably one of the best studies I ever saw. It was done by Hills and Kaiser, and I still refer to it. It talks about landowner liability, and they reviewed claims and cases across the United States. And, threat to landowners is probably exaggerated. Be familiar with the laws in your state and incorporate safety and risk management into your timber management. And I still feel that's pretty specific today and pretty applicable to today. My discussion is going to be framed on, I'm involved with about 30 million acres of property, so some of the stories that I tell, you've got to put in that perspective, that there's a lot of property out there. You can own a piece of property, and there's a pretty good chance you'll never have a liability issue on your property. I mean, that's just, it's not a very frequent type occurrence. If you, everything's framed on our common law, and this is a definition, but the things that we need to focus in on here are definitions for responsibly breach, duty of care, and these are pretty broad words. And what I think they mean, and what you think they mean, and what a plaintiff's attorney thinks they mean, and a defense attorney is about 4 different things there. The claims that are successful can be shown that the owner was responsible for the injury, and somehow they breached that duty of care. And the duty of care is a basic term which has a very broad definition. Negligence is, next one, is you had a duty, you breached the duty, and there's a connection between the damages. That's just a short explanation. The duties that you have to people, next one, is invitees. Those are people that are invited on your property as a business pursuit. Licensee would be invited to hunt for no charge, and trespassers. These are all just layers of people that would be on your property and what you owe to them. If I go on a guided hunt with a guided outfitter, commercial hunting, I mean, if I stub my toe, he's pretty much responsible for it. Because he's taking money, he's taking hunting, and everything he does needs to be in that direction. If you invite me on your hunt for no charge, then there's a lot less liability on your part. And then trespassers, there's the least amount of duty to protect. There's also been some new discussion about a known trespasser, somebody that you know is operating on your property, and there's a little bit higher duty than you have for a trespasser. My next one is inspect and warn. Landowners that take money for activities have a duty to inspect and warn their property. I'm sorry, I'm holding the mic down too low. I'm trying to get through it. The inspect and warn, what I like to talk about on this is how much, how often do you inspect, how do you warn? If you're having a hunting club on your property, inspecting it 3 years ago isn't enough. You know, I generally would say you need to inspect it every time the lease is renewed, and you need to appropriately warn of any changes on the property. Next one. Okay, that's what I just talked about. Let's go to the hunting liability recreational use statute. Most states have this. Alabama has a very good one. The duty of care reduced. This is for people that are not taking money for hunting. The purpose is to encourage owners of land to make available to the public for recreational users without charge, except if you're leasing to the state, then you can have a charge, and that'd be on the wildlife management owners. The recreational, I've seen some lawsuits on these. I haven't been involved in one, but we have used this as protecting the club from something that the guest had happened to the guest. But normally, what I've seen suit-wise on these is they've attacked it on the basis that you didn't make the land available for public use. You might have invited me and said, hey, go hunting on my property, but you didn't open it up for the public in general. And since you didn't open it up for the public, then this law will apply to it. And there was the next one. What I like to explain to landowners is just understand your legal responsibility to anybody using your property. And a lot of this is common sense. Again, what I think is common sense and what you think is common sense is probably a lot different than what some other people think. The most common question I get on liability coverage on the insurance program, is it covered? I mean, is what covered? Liability, and this is the biggest misconception of these programs, is liability is not necessarily what happens to you, it's what you happen or cause to happen to somebody else. Like a hunting club member, if he trips and falls and injures himself, breaks his leg in a hole, I mean, the club's not necessarily responsible for that. But if they do something to cause a guest to be injured, then there's liability in that. And that's probably the biggest misconception that comes with hunting club insurance. It's designed to protect you for your legal liability and not necessarily an accident that you would cause to yourself. When I talk to landowners, I like to frame in the idea, can you sue somebody for this? That's what liability is about. Can you sue somebody for that injury that you just had? The insurance agreement that the industry uses is pretty standard language for general liability, and it's kind of an interesting way to do things. It took me about 10 years to admit it was interesting, but a general liability policy isn't like a property policy. A property policy is going to tell you your house is covered for this if it burns down or vandalized, or a general liability policy tells you what's not covered. All right, so it has an agreement that says we're going to protect you from your legal obligation, except for, and then the policy is just filled with exclusions because it's telling you what's not covered. And once you get your head around that, it's a pretty interesting thing. When I started in the business, it was a 73 form. That's the forms that are approved by the insurance commissioners. And the 1973 form was the standard general liability form that most insurance companies use. It was a 2-page document. It was front and back and about this big. The 2001 form is about 30 pages. And then there's numerous exclusions that are added to that on top of it. And what kicked it all off were asbestos claims, where they started filing asbestos claims against 30-year-old general liability policies. And so that's what really changed the wording. It was a driving force. Next one, the standard exclusions that are on a liability policy, and these are probably present in about 90% of every general liability policy out there in the country. They're just normal exclusions. For intended injuries, it's going to be excluded. Liquor, if you're in the business. Workers' compensation, because it should be something else. Pollution. Aircraft, auto, watercraft, because those should be covered on your auto policy. Transporting mobile equipment. War, property that's under your care, custody, and control. Now, next one, what's important with that stuff is then companies add additional stuff to it. Recently, the abuse, molestation exclusions been added, computer-related, mold, mildew, and terrorism are the most recent exclusions at a lot of companies. For landowners, what's important is that exclusions aren't manuscripted to go to that policy that change things specific to landowner liability. That would be tree stands, ATVs, eliminating coverage for member-type claims on hunting clubs, logging and lumbering, something that's specific to that you would do, that they're going to add to that policy to eliminate that coverage. Some of the examples that I wanted to talk about, and I'm not talking about any open claims that I have currently, or really any specific claim that I have closed, but more of a general discussion of the type of claims I've had on landowner liability, timberland liability. The one that I like to refer to give you an idea why I think every claim has its own difference. I mean, I deal with 50 to 100 tree stand claims a year. They're all different. Every auto claim is different. Every ATV claim, every shooting claim is different. And the one example I like to talk about is, and this is an example to give you the kind of layers that you have to deal with. I've had ATV claims where somebody's injured themselves on an ATV on a piece of property. Now say this is a hunting club and it's a guest, all right, but say and we get a claim reported, well, the guest injured himself, he hit a ditch on the property, and they feel the club, the landowner, is responsible for it. Well, as you dig into the claim, the first layer might be, well, the guest left the property when they were done hunting, and he went back an hour later because he forgot his tree stand. All right, so he drove his ATV around the gate. Now at that point, is he a trespasser or is he a guest? And that's where the gray area comes in. And then the next thing, say it was 2 days later. He came back 2 days later. Or if he came back that night, say he came back about 3 or 4 hours later, but that 3 or 4 hours later he was at the bar for 3 hours. So then all that comes into play when you have any kind of claim. And that's just the kind of specifics that you get involved with. The other ones that I deal with all the time are gates, ATVs. And the first gate claim that I was involved with was pretty dramatic. The hunting club member drove past and saw the gate was down, and it was a cable gate, and this was 91, this was 92. It was on a large commercial landowner. He saw the gate was down, he put it up, locked it, and went on, and there were kids down there partying at a local swimming hole, and they came out of there at high speed and they sheared the roof of that car off. And, you can imagine what it did to the kids inside. I mean, they all lived, but it was pretty dramatic. And they didn't take that to court, but it was settled for a fair amount of money, just because of, there was a deep pocket there. The other one that I was involved with was a swimming hole, and this was a pretty dramatic injury too. It was a trespasser. The club had taken down the posted signs for this area because the gate kept getting torn down, and they just moved the posted signs back to the other side of the swimming hole, and it was a real bad injury that the landowner was found responsible for. Again, that was a big corporate landowner. The other ones are horses on roads. We've had a few of those, horses and dogs on roads, and there's a whole another area for liability on that is probably out of my league. But we have had claims where a guy has stabled a horse on the property. The club has either left the gate open or it's a temporary place for the horses to stay while they're hunting, and they get out and then somebody hits them. There was a shooting under a recreational immunity law where somebody allowed the hunter to come on their property and hunt without charge. The bullet went off the property and it hit somebody sitting in their house. And the court ruled that the landowner was 10% responsible for that claim, just because they had it. 90% of it went to the shooter, but 10% went to the landowner. And that caused a big uproar about recreational immunity law, and they changed that law. That claim was in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago. The ATV claims that we get, normally the worst ones are kids on ATVs, and they hit gates. I talked about a little bit about gates, and the two other claims that I like to talk about was it was another hunting club member left the site. He shut the gate. He didn't know there was somebody else back there. The member rode out and hit the gate from the inside. And that's when I wrote, the injury wasn't bad, but it's when I wrote a safety release. So everybody puts reflectors on the outside of the gate, and nobody puts them on the inside of the gates. And you just don't think about that. But there's a lot of times people are coming the other way, especially if there's a couple of places to come in and out of the property. The other one was, and you've probably seen this here, was some of the large industrial landowners moved their gates back so you could pull a log truck in, so the log truck wouldn't be sitting on the road when you unlock the gate. So you pull be at least a tractor trailer width back in the woods. Well, we had a hunt club member that went by and saw that the gate wasn't there, and he went driving down the road at a high speed, not expecting the gate to be back in the woods 200 feet, and he hit that. And so there was some liability on the part of the landowner for not warning that that gate had been moved. At least that's how it came back. The final thing that I just wanted to mention, and this is just my take on things, you can go to the next one. What I try to tell landowners is, you know, most of this stuff's never going to happen to you, but there's some things that you need to do in case it does. With hunting leases, I mean, hold harmlesses that detail the responsibilities. I mean, the hold harmless isn't going to totally protect you, but it's one layer in there that helps you defend a claim. A map of the property that details any hazards, gates, property boundaries, adjacent landowners, where houses sit on adjacent land, where other club members may be hunting, where other property is insurance for the club landowners. Should be an additional insured on anybody that's operating on your property. And that would include a consultant, a logger, or anybody else that's going. You need to be listed as an additional insured on their policy. That's a standard practice for corporate landowners. What would happen is if, say, a hunt club's on your property hunting, you're not on their policy as an additional insured, and something takes place where the hunt club's sued and you're sued as part of that. Well, the hunt club policy would protect the hunting club, but they would look at the landowner and say, we don't know who you are. You know, you're not listed on our policy. We don't have any idea who you are. So you'd have to seek your own defense. If you're an additional insured, you would have defense under that policy. And that's a pretty important concept. And it's why corporate landowners do it for logging contractors and consultants or anything else operating on their property. This is more directed at hunting, but a lot of this is just particular attention to gates and other hazards. Any improvements on your property, that's where attention needs to be focused in terms of limiting your liability. It's inspecting those areas, warning that they're there. You put a new ditch in, it's nice to have reflectors there, or at least flagging that shows that there's a difference in the water flow or a different structure there that somebody can hit. And that's it.